Welcome to Interfaith Views and Issues, a program designed towards establishing tolerance and better understanding among different faiths and cultures. I'm your host, Shafait Mohammed, and today we have a presentation by Dr. Keith Spencer, a very prominent pastor in South Florida, USA. And he delivered this message at an Abrahamic program organized by Al-Hikmat Services, Inc. at Darul Uloom Institute in South Florida.
Well, good afternoon. I'm the last person, I think, speaking before lunch, so I'll try to keep it short. And Dr. Jaffer, I just wanted to point out that I've already walked 2,882 steps today, so yeah, I'm on my way. All right. Only 8,000 more to go. All right. I want to read a little different section about Abraham from the scripture. The Lord appeared to Abraham by the oaks of Mamre. As he sat at the entrance of his tent in the heat of the day, he looked up and saw 3 men standing near him. When he saw them, he ran from the tent entrance to meet them, and he bowed down to the ground. He said, "My Lord, if I find favor with you, do not pass by your servant. Let a little water be brought, and wash your feet and rest yourselves under a tree. Let me bring a little bread that you may refresh yourselves, and after you may pass, since you have come to your servant." So they said, "Do as you have said." And Abraham hastened into the tent to Sarah and said, "Make quickly 3 measures of choice flour, knead it and make cakes." Abraham ran to the herd and took a calf, tender and good, and gave it to the servant who hastened to prepare it. He took curds and milk and placed them before them, and stood under the tree while they ate. In January of 1999, I went with a number of students from my seminary. We went to the Holy Land for a 2-week experience. We visited many places sacred to Muslims, to Jews, and to Christians. Our trip that year coincided with the holy month of Ramadan. And one of our travels led us to the International Center in Bethlehem, where a group of Muslim students who are trained in dance performed for us from their tradition. Now, they had fasted all day, and we were there in the late afternoon before they had broken their fast. But they danced with such energy and such passion. We were amazed to see them pour themselves into the dance. And when they were finished, they ran up to us and they grabbed us and they dragged us all out onto the floor, determined to show us some simple steps so that we could join with them in the passion of the dance. Their hospitality, their giving of themselves, their welcome to us is born out of the hospitality, I think, that we all share in the stories of Abraham. All of our faiths share the story of this ideal and perfect hospitality that Abraham showed to the strangers. Since arriving in Florida 11 years ago, I too have borne witness to the hospitality that you have shown here at Darul. When I first came, the Mulana invited me and welcomed me and gave me a tour of the facility and welcomed me into the fellowship of the group that gathers together around Hollywood, of the pastors and the imam and of the rabbis, in which we share our commonality. A year later, of course, were the tragic events of 9/11, and I found myself here again among other clergy and rabbis and our Muslim brothers and sisters as we were united in decrying the violence and standing together for the cause of peace. And I'm sure you remember us all sitting around the table, bringing words of peace and comfort to one another. And I remember my heart being torn, having to see the police presence here day after day because of threats against this facility and against your people. But what we know is that the hospitality that we share in Abraham, from his example, from setting aside for the stranger the food, the bread, the curds, the shade, is that even though we know we have differences, and we can tell the stories of Abraham, and we can find our differences, that we can speak still of what we share in common. In your own tradition, in the Quran, in 5:48 and 49:13, we see the idea that God could have created humankind as a single community, but did not. That is, that religious diversity is God-willed, and for that purpose, that human beings might know one another, and that we could compete together in goodness for the sake of one another. Just as I got to experience the joyful hearts in hospitality of those students so long ago in the Holy Land, we see that Abraham receives the promises of God, the promise of son, of land, of nation, of name, of king, of descendants, and of blessing. And Abraham responds to those promises. Abraham acts. He is not passive, having received the promises of God. Abraham acts. And the texts present Abraham, even in his humanness, as being faithful to what God is calling him to do and to be. Some scholars suggest in our own tradition that we don't know why God chose Abraham rather than another. Though, Rabbi, I appreciate that story. I'm going to have to share that. I have not heard that before. But we do know that God chose Abraham so that all of creation, humankind and non-human alike, might be reclaimed and live harmoniously within the original divine intention for the world. Through God's choice of Abraham, we have before us today and each day the witness to his passionate and perfect hospitality for the stranger. You may know that a few years ago, 138 Muslim scholars and leaders wrote together a document called A Common Word Between You and Us. It was sent to Christian leaders throughout the world. It was October of 2007. And in that document we hear the following. There are numerous injunctions in Islam about the necessity and paramount importance of love and mercy toward the neighbor. Love of the neighbor is an essential and integral part of the faith in God and love of God, because in Islam without love of the neighbor, there is no true faith in God and no righteousness. The National Council of Churches, of which my Lutheran tradition is a part, responded to this letter with some of these words. As you did in the common word between us and you, we also affirm the need to take action that demonstrates our commitment to our common and just world. It is our conviction that the exploration of our shared ground requires that we move beyond polite conversation to interaction with one another. We believe that deep relationship as neighbors calls us to common engagement in a world plagued by violence, poverty, environmental degradation, and such other ills that are in need in our moral leadership in addressing them. The National Council of Churches also lifted up for us that our need, that local churches, mosques, Islamic centers, and one certainly can extend to our Jewish brothers and sisters, to our synagogues, our need to engage with one another in new and positive ways, to educate one another about ourselves, so that we can present one another with authenticity and credibility, with respect and appreciation. Today marks another moment, another step in harmony with these goals among our congregations. And I am grateful for the witness and hospitality of Abraham, who forms the common bond for us to share the hospitality we have today. And it is my hope and promise that we continue to share in hospitality with one another. We have been blessed at our church to have the Maulana come to speak authentic words of the Islamic faith before our parish, to speak against so much that is displayed and misrepresented about Islam. And you have done so on numerous occasions over the decade that we have known each other. There are so many opportunities for you and for us to open up ourselves in fellowship, to tear down misperceptions, to show hospitality, and to be a blessing to one another. I thank you for the opportunity today to receive the blessing of your hospitality. And may we in turn continue to invite you and share our hospitality. Thanks be to God. Thank you.
Thank you for viewing Interfaith Views and Issues, a program designed towards establishing tolerance and better understanding among different faiths and cultures. I'm your host, Shafayat Mohammed. And for those of you who have just tuned in, you have been viewing a lecture by Dr. Keith A.Spencer, a very prominent pastor in South Florida. He has been lecturing, or his presentation was done at an Abrahamic program organized by Al-Hikmat services at Darul Uloom Islamic Institute in South Florida. Tune in to Al-Hikmat TV for Interfaith Views and Issues next week, same time, same station, inshallah. Assalamu alaikum.